This is why junior staff shouldn't present to clients, Mason snapped, slicing through my sentence like a knife through warm clay. I froze. 20 heads turned toward me. All eyes abandoned the slide I'd been explaining my proposed redesign of Chicago's flood drainage infrastructure and locked onto the burning embarrassment, now spreading across my face. I felt heat rising to my temples, the silence pounding louder than any insult. We were in a full boardroom: executives, engineers, city officials. And I had just been publicly humiliated for daring to innovate. Mason leaned back in his chair, voice smooth, confident, weaponized. Her model lacks field experience. It's academic at best. Proven methods work. We're not here to reinvent the wheel. The smirks, the stifled coughs, the unspoken agreement hanging in the air. He was the director. I was just a systems engineer with no title, no seniority, and apparently no place at the table. Until someone broke the silence. Wait a second. It was Joanne Bridges, Deputy Commissioner of Infrastructure. She leaned forward slightly, squinting at my badge. Harper Quinn. Quinn as in. Are you related to Arthur Quinn? The room shifted. Mason blinked. I swallowed, every fiber of me screaming not to answer. But I did. Yes. He's my father. Joanne sat back, visibly stunned. Arthur Quinn saved the city during the 2007 flood crisis. His systems are still the gold standard. And you're telling me his daughter just got shut down in a meeting like this? The tension flipped like a coin in midair. Mason cleared his throat. Well, I wasn't aware of the connection. Of course, Harper's insight is always welcome here. Suddenly, the same proposal he just dismissed was worth exploring. The same woman he tried to silence was now being recognized. But here's the truth. That moment didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a trap. Because I wasn't being heard for my ideas. I was being acknowledged for my bloodline. And something inside me snapped. If you've ever been dismissed just because you didn't have a title, if you've ever watched someone steal the mic only when your last name becomes useful, then stay with me. Because this story doesn't end with a promotion. It begins with a quiet, calculated reversal. If you've ever been underestimated because of your position, not your potential, drop your story in the comments. I promise, you're not alone. People assume growing up as the daughter of Arthur Quinn must have been a golden ticket. And in some ways, maybe it was. I had access to ideas most kids couldn't pronounce. I learned to read blueprints before I learned to ride a bike. My dad used to roll them out across our dining table, narrating each design like it was a bedtime story. But here's what no one sees behind the legacy. Every A I earned in school? Of course she did. She's Arthur Quinn's daughter. Every award. She must have had help. And every time I stepped into a room full of engineers, the expectation wasn't that I would be good. It was that I had better be perfect, or else I was just the beneficiary of nepotism. The weight of being his daughter followed me like a silent second name, heavier than any last name I ever carried. That's why, when I graduated top of my class in civil and systems engineering, I did something my family didn't expect. I stripped my resume down, removed the top-tier internships, deleted the name Arthur Quinn from every line where it might have bought me a shortcut. And I applied to Amertech Systems, one of the largest infrastructure firms in the Midwest, using nothing but my first name, my real GPA, and a single-page summary of experience. No references. No favors. No phone calls. I didn't tell my father. Not because I was ashamed, but because I needed to know I could do it without him. When Amertech offered me a junior engineering role, I accepted without hesitation. I remember staring at the plain white contract and feeling something I hadn't felt in years: relief. Because that offer wasn't made to Arthur Quinn's daughter. It was made to Harper. I started from the bottom. Ran coffee in the mornings. Double-checked models while everyone else was on their lunch breaks. And I kept my head down. Not out of fear, but because I wanted the respect that only comes when no one expects it. Over the next 2 years, I earned slow but steady promotions. I had no special privileges. No one gave me shortcuts. But I did gain something far more valuable: trust. From my immediate team. From colleagues like Sienna Morales, who saw my work before they saw my name. From my former supervisor, Eli Roberts, who mentored me without knowing my bloodline. And I was okay with that. Until Eli left for another division. And Mason Langley replaced him. That's when everything changed. Mason didn't know who I was at first, and that was fine by me. But his attitude was different from day one. Distant. Authoritative. Suspicious of anything that didn't come from a playbook published in the 1990s. When he shot down my first proposal, I brushed it off. When he rejected Sienna's filtration system without even running tests, I got angry. Not because he dismissed her, but because it reminded me of every moment I'd ever been measured by a name instead of a mind. Still, I kept my silence. Kept the legacy hidden. Because I wasn't ready to be seen as his daughter again. But, as you already know, that didn't last. That boardroom? That moment he changed his tune after hearing my last name? It wasn't just a crack in the system. It was a warning. That no matter how hard you work, some people will only listen once you carry a legacy. Even if they spent years ignoring everything you had to say before that. And that's the moment I realized. If this system couldn't respect merit, then maybe it was time to build a better one. The first time I saw Mason Langley speak in a meeting, I thought he was just polished. He had the type of voice that sounded like it belonged behind a podium. The type of smile that said, "I've done this 1,000 times." And the kind of resume that made people nod respectfully before he even opened his mouth. He came from a legacy firm in Boston. Big contracts, big titles, big ego. His pitch deck was crisp. His suit sharper than his logic. And from the second he walked through the doors of Ameritech as our new division director, the temperature in the room changed. Gone were the brainstorming huddles. Gone were the whiteboard marathons where junior engineers could scribble wild ideas and actually be heard. In their place? Formalized briefings, strict protocols, layers of approval. And, above all, deference. Mason didn't just manage a team, he curated an echo chamber. And if your idea didn't sound like something he'd already said 5 years ago, it didn't make it past the first sentence. Sienna felt it first. She had just finished developing a revolutionary, low-cost water filtration system that could cut urban waste by 60%. She worked nights and weekends on it, modeling, simulating, testing. When she finally presented it to Mason, she barely got through slide 3 before he waved a hand. "Too risky," he said flatly. "No real-world validation. Stick to what works." He didn't ask a single question. Didn't glance at the research. Didn't even let her finish. After the meeting, I found her sitting in the break room, staring at her laptop. "I should have known better," she muttered. "Guys like that don't care unless the idea comes from someone wearing his kind of tie." I didn't know what to say. Because, deep down, I knew she was right. 2 weeks later, my own proposal, a modular drainage redesign that could shave months off construction timelines, met the same fate. He said it was theoretical. I had built 3 working models. He said, clients don't want new. I had literal data showing client-side interest. But Mason wasn't rejecting bad ideas. He was rejecting who they came from. If you weren't a senior engineer with at least 2 decades in the game and a golf membership, your voice didn't carry. And this wasn't just about status. It was about fear. Mason wasn't an innovator. He was a gatekeeper of comfort, holding tightly to old frameworks, because new ones threatened to reveal what he didn't understand. To him, junior staff were support beams, not architects. We were there to tweak, not to lead. The most infuriating part, he thought he was being reasonable. When challenged, he'd simply point to his track record. "Look how far I've taken teams before," he'd say. "Just follow my system." But his system didn't just stifle creativity. It suffocated it. Week by week, idea by idea, people stopped speaking up. They stopped staying late. They stopped trying. And I watched as brilliant minds dulled themselves to fit into his comfort zone. Sienna once said, "He doesn't just ignore innovation, he kills it quietly." And she was right. Mason wasn't a monster. He was something more dangerous. He was the kind of leader who never raises his voice, because silence was his sharpest weapon. And at the time, I still thought we could work around him. That if we just tried harder, explained better, built stronger models, we'd be heard. But I was wrong. Because you can't reason with someone who's afraid of being proven irrelevant. And Mason? He'd built an entire career out of staying just relevant enough to silence the rest. The morning after the boardroom incident, my inbox had a new message from Mason. Subject line: Private meeting. 9:30 a.m. No details. No context. Just his name. No good morning. No signature. Just the authority of a man who assumed you'd come when called. I stared at the screen for a long minute before closing my laptop and walking toward his office. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe a warning. Maybe an apology. Maybe both. What I didn't expect was warmth. Harper, he greeted me, standing up as I entered, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk. Thanks for making time. I sat down, silent, guarded. He smiled. Not the smug grin from yesterday's meeting, this one was practiced, polished. The kind people use when they're trying to fix something they broke but can't admit they broke it. I've been reviewing your file, he began, tapping the closed folder in front of him as if that made the gesture feel more official. Your performance has consistently exceeded expectations. I think it's time we talk about leadership. He blinked. Just like that? Yesterday I was too inexperienced. Today I was ready for more responsibility? I didn't say anything. I just let the silence sit between us. Mason continued, his tone casual, like we were old colleagues sharing coffee. The city's pushing for faster timelines on the South Side infrastructure upgrade. Your modular drainage model. It might be exactly what we need. I'd like you to lead that redesign. I felt my hands tighten in my lap. This was the opportunity I'd fought for on paper, at least. But every part of it felt wrong. Not because I didn't want it, but because I didn't trust the reason behind it. So I asked, carefully, what changed? He hesitated, just for a second. I've always appreciated your contributions. Perhaps I haven't communicated that clearly. Olaven. I looked him dead in the eye. You communicated it very clearly yesterday. Both before and after you knew who my father was. His jaw tightened. Just a flicker. Then, smooth as ever, he replied. That doesn't change the fact that you're qualified. No, I said softly. But it changes why you're offering this now. Silence. He leaned back, trying to regain his rhythm. This is a career advancement, Harper. You've earned it. I let the moment hang. Then said, if I accept, it's on one condition. He raised an eyebrow. Sienna's filtration system. It gets a full evaluation. Independent, transparent, and funded. That caught him off guard. Her system had practical flaws, he said quickly. You didn't test it, I replied. You dismissed it in under 5 minutes. He stared at me, trying to recalibrate. Finally, he nodded. Fine. I'll authorize a review. And that was it. I walked out with a new title, a new assignment, and a weight I hadn't expected. Because, no matter how hard I had worked to get here, it didn't feel like I'd won anything. It felt like I'd been handed something not because of my competence, but because of my last name. And worse, because he was afraid of what that name might cost him if he didn't. That's the curse of legacy. Even when you earn your place, people assume you were placed there. And now I had to ask myself a harder question. Would my team think I'd fought for them? Or that I'd simply played a card they never had? The congratulations started before I even reached my desk. A few colleagues clapped lightly as I walked by. One of the senior engineers gave me a thumbs up. Another offered a nod I hadn't seen from him in 2 years. I should have felt proud. But all I felt was exposed. Because they weren't congratulating me on my idea. They were congratulating me on finally being seen. And deep down, we all knew why. The email had gone out that morning. Harper Quinn would lead the city's new drainage redesign project. A major milestone. A big win. A bold step for innovation. Except, it didn't feel like any of those things. Because the project hadn't been approved when I first submitted it. Or the second time. Or after I refined it with newer data. It was only approved after one thing changed. Mason learned who my father was. That truth sat with me like a weight in my chest, dull but persistent. I opened my laptop and saw a dozen Slack messages from teammates. Well deserved. Finally, someone who knows what she's doing. Guess having a legend for a dad pays off after all. That last one stung more than I wanted it to. I clicked away from the chat. A few hours later, Sienna dropped by my desk. She didn't say anything right away, just slid into the open seat across from me with her coffee in hand. I heard, she said quietly. Yeah. You okay? I hesitated. I got the project. And I got you the review budget. She blinked. Wait, you did? I nodded. Full evaluation. External reviewer. No interference. A slow smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. You used your leverage. I looked down at my hands. I don't know if that's what I did, or if that's what it looks like. End of 2. She leaned forward. Does it matter? It does to me. She watched me for a moment, then said something I didn't expect. You know what the worst part is about working under guys like Mason? It's not just the rejection. It's how they train us to feel guilty when we finally get through. I didn't answer, because I knew she was right. It wasn't the win that felt hollow. It was how quickly it had been redefined as if my work suddenly had value, not because it was better, but because of the man behind my name. And the worst part? No one else seemed to notice. Mason smiled at me in meetings now. He quoted my own metrics like they'd always been a priority. He even called my plan forward-thinking in front of the execs as if he hadn't dismissed it as overly theoretical just 2 weeks earlier. But when I watched him nod along during my presentation to the internal team, I saw it. He wasn't proud. He was protecting himself. Because now, if the project succeeded, he'd say he saw the potential all along. And if it failed, well, it was a junior engineer's risk. That's the game. And if you've ever had to play that game where your success is only acknowledged after someone rewrites the story around it, then you know how it feels. Have you ever had to accept a win that didn't feel like yours? One that came at the wrong time or for the wrong reason? If so, drop your story in the comments. Let's talk about the victories no one claps for. The idea came over lunch. Sienna and I were sitting on a concrete ledge outside the building, splitting a sandwich and watching a delivery truck try unsuccessfully to back into a narrow loading bay. We hadn't spoken much since the promotion. She hadn't asked questions. I hadn't offered explanations. But the silence between us wasn't cold. It was tired. Shared. Familiar. I took a bite of bread I couldn't taste and finally said, "They've opened submissions for the annual Innovation Challenge." Sienna looked over, wiping mustard off her thumb. So? The winning project gets full funding. Implementation priority. Bonus pay for the team. She nodded slowly. And if we're going to change how things work around here, maybe we don't wait for Mason's permission. That got her attention. I reached into my bag, pulled out my tablet, and opened a draft I hadn't shown anyone. My drainage model, the one that got me the promotion, had been reworked to integrate filtration architecture, the kind Sienna had spent a year building. We'd always known the two systems could complement each other. We just hadn't been allowed to prove it. She scrolled in silence, flipping through diagrams, pressure maps, flowcharts. Then she looked up. You want to combine them? I nodded. We submit as one project. A hybrid solution, filtration and distribution. Faster, cleaner, cheaper. Her eyebrows knit together. And you think Mason's going to let us? I shook my head. He won't have a say. The judging panel includes the board and external reviewers. If we win, they'll be the ones signing off. Sienna leaned back, exhaling. And if we don't? Then we just keep working under the same ceiling. Nothing changes. But if we do win... I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. She looked down at the tablet again. You listed Mason as the project lead. I nodded. Why? Because he needs to be there to present it to the board. But the submission rules say the named lead must be able to explain the project in full detail, alone. No support during Q&A. A beat of silence. Then she smiled. You're going to let him bury himself. No, I said. I'm going to let him step onto a stage he doesn't understand. Whether he drowns or swims, that's on him. She handed me back the tablet. You're scary when you're calm. I smiled faintly. I've had a lot of practice. We didn't say much else. We just sat there, the buzz of city traffic washing over us like white noise, while a plan quietly fell into place between bites of cold sandwich and warm frustration. We both knew we couldn't fight Mason directly. Not and win. He was too protected, too rehearsed. But systems like his, they don't fall with fists. They unravel under the weight of their own assumptions. So we went to work. Evenings, weekends, lunch breaks. We refined her filtration process, added dynamic inputs to match distribution needs, created a model so efficient and cost-effective it would be impossible to ignore. And all the while, Mason had no idea. That's the thing about quiet packs. They don't need headlines. They don't make noise. But when built on trust and truth, they can split a system wide open without breaking a single rule. The morning of the finalist announcement, the office buzzed with the kind of energy that only shows up when something big is about to shift. Someone had taped a printout of the Innovation Challenge poster to the break room fridge with a neon sticky note that read, "Fingers crossed." I didn't say a word. When the email came through at 10:03 a.m., I opened it with my hands resting unnaturally still on the keyboard. Congratulations. Your submission, Hybrid Urban Flow Optimization, has been selected as a top 3 finalist. You will present to the board this Friday at 9 a.m. in Conference Hall C. I looked across the room. Mason was already reading the same message. He turned toward me with that tight, politician's smile. Congratulations, he said, walking over. Well done. I'm honored you listed me as lead. I kept my expression neutral. You're the division director. It seemed appropriate. He nodded, clearly pleased. Yes, of course. I'll need you and Morales to brief me on the technical components before Friday. High level, only I'll handle the rest. Sure, I said. Though the board requires the lead to present independently during Q&A, they'll be expecting detailed technical understanding. A flicker crossed his face. He recovered quickly. Naturally. Let's schedule some review sessions. We scheduled 3. In each one, Sienna and I walked him through the system. Filtration algorithms, pressure differentials, adaptive flow modules. At first, he nodded along confidently. But the deeper we went, the more his questions revealed what he didn't know. We didn't lie. We didn't sabotage. We just explained things as they were. Fully. Accurately. Completely. By the 3rd session, his posture had changed. He wasn't leaning back anymore. He was hunched forward, scribbling notes, eyes darting from diagram to formula like he was trying to memorize a language he never learned to speak. The night before the presentation, I saw him still at his desk, flipping through the technical brief. His hand was trembling slightly when he reached for his coffee. And I knew he wasn't ready. Friday came fast. Conference Hall C was filled with board members, senior stakeholders, and a few curious execs who just wanted to witness the drama of the finals. Mason stepped up to the podium. His suit was sharp, his slides polished, his voice steady for the first 3 minutes. Then came the questions. Dr. Whitaker, one of the board's engineering consultants, raised a hand. I'm curious about the decision to use a variable rate filtration threshold in Zone 3. What predictive model was used to determine seasonal fluctuation tolerances? Mason blinked. Yes. The, threshold adjustment is based on adaptive flow metrics and standard environmental assumptions. Dr. Whitaker frowned. What assumptions exactly, and how were those calibrated? Mason looked at me. I didn't move. Protocol was clear. No supporting answers unless directly invited. After an awkward pause, Mason fumbled something about modular configuration, but the words didn't land. The room stiffened. That's when Dr. Whitaker turned to the panel. Perhaps we should hear from the development team. Miss Quinn? Miss Morales? All heads turned. Mason gave a tight nod, stepping aside. Sienna and I stood, calm and measured, and walked to the front. For the next 20 minutes, we answered every question with precision. Not arrogance, just clarity born from actually building the thing. By the end, the room felt different. We weren't junior engineers anymore. We were experts. We were architects. We were undeniable. And Mason? He sat in the front row, silent. For the first time, he had nothing to add. For the first time in weeks, the office felt light. There were no formal announcements, no internal memos, no backpatting emails. But everyone knew. Our project had just become the frontrunner for full implementation. I'd overheard whispers in the hall. Did you hear Harper and Sienna crushed the Q&A? Another voice chimed in. I thought Mason was leading it. Followed by silence. Mason didn't say much that morning. He avoided eye contact, nodded politely in meetings, kept his voice lower than usual. But I knew it wouldn't last. And I was right. 3 days later, I got a calendar invite from him. Southside Implementation Review, 10 a.m., Conf Room 4C. The invite list? Just me and him. I walked in to find a slide deck already projected on the wall. It looked clean, elegant, simplified. Too simplified. I've made a few adjustments, Mason said, gesturing toward the screen. Just a high-level overview for stakeholder meetings, something easier to digest. I stood there, watching as he clicked through the slides. The flow models were reduced to arrows. The pressure system's gone. Filtration mechanics? Replaced by a single bullet. Advanced purification layer. He turned to me. I don't want to overwhelm them with technical jargon. Simplicity sells. I folded my arms. Simplicity is fine until it becomes misleading. His smile thinned. Harper, the people in that room care about efficiency, not engineering theory. Let's give them something they can follow. They can follow, I said. 3 of the 5 stakeholders have engineering backgrounds. They'll notice what's missing. Mason's tone shifted. Just a hair sharper. Well, I've already sent the draft. Let's not overcomplicate things. I didn't push. Not yet. I just nodded. Fine. I'll prepare some technical backup slides in case they ask questions. Keep them in the appendix, he said. Only use them if absolutely necessary. But I didn't. I created a second version of the presentation one with all the technical depth intact and loaded it onto my laptop. The morning of the stakeholder review, I arrived early. Mason walked in 10 minutes later, calm and collected. He opened with his slides. Broad claims, sweeping language, polished delivery. 5 minutes in, a hand went up. It was Helena Brooks, the city's chief infrastructure engineer. I'm not seeing the breakdown of the filtration variance algorithm, she said. That was what made this system stand out in the board review. Can you walk us through that? Mason paused. Of course. The, filtration component is optimized for adaptability. We use responsive flow regulation, which increases efficiency. Helena didn't blink. Responsive to what parameters, specifically? He glanced at me. I didn't move. Another stakeholder chimed in. Actually, I'd love to see the distribution model again. Especially that zone balancing mechanism you mentioned during the finals. Mason hesitated. I opened my laptop. If I may, I said, I've prepared a detailed set of slides in case there were questions. I projected the full system model by model, diagram by diagram, and walked the room through everything Mason had stripped away. For the next 40 minutes, I led the discussion. Mason stood beside me, silent, offering the occasional vague affirmation. Yes, exactly. Precisely what we intended. just as planned. But we both knew it wasn't. By the time the meeting ended, the stakeholders weren't thanking Mason. They were shaking my hand, asking me to follow up, requesting my contact information. The counterplay had been simple. Tell the truth. Tell it well. Let the facts do the talking. And once again, Mason had no defense for the one thing he couldn't control. What we actually built. The email came at 6:42 a.m. I was still in sweatpants, sipping coffee, not quite awake enough to parse what I was reading. Until I saw the subject line. Project Expansion Proposal, Immediate Response Requested. Attached was a formal letter from the Regional Infrastructure Board. It began with polite boilerplate. Thank you for your team's outstanding contribution to the pilot program. But then it shifted. Given the success metrics achieved in the Southside deployment and the unanimous endorsement from city stakeholders, we would like to formally extend an offer to lead an expanded implementation across 3 adjacent counties. And then came the line that made me sit up. We request Harper Quinn be designated as project lead. No co-lead. No team under Director Langley. Just me. I reread that line 3 times. Then I noticed the CC field. Mason was included. 20 minutes later, we were both in the large conference room, seated opposite the Regional Planning Committee. I could tell he hadn't had time to process it. He was still wearing the same grin he used for public-facing victories, but this one didn't quite reach his eyes. After the usual pleasantries, one of the commissioners turned to him. We were extremely impressed with the system performance. The pressure calibration, the adaptive filtration, the speed of deployment, truly remarkable. Diction. Mason nodded. We're very proud of the team. Of course, I've overseen the implementation personally. A pause. The commissioner leaned forward. Yes, and we'd like to shift leadership to Miss Quinn for this next phase. Her technical expertise has proven crucial, and our consultants believe she's best equipped to guide the expansion. You could feel the silence ripple. Mason's smile faltered just slightly. Well, he said slowly. Harper is an excellent engineer, but as her director, I'd naturally continue oversight to maintain cohesion. The commissioner didn't flinch. I'm afraid our request is specific. The expanded contract includes Miss Quinn as named lead. It's non-negotiable. He blinked. I stayed quiet. There was nothing else to say. Back at the office, he called me into his office like nothing had happened. He gestured to the chair. I stayed standing. This situation creates some awkward structure, he said. Perhaps we could propose a co-lead model. You handle technical direction, and I maintain executive oversight. I gave him the same expression he used to give me in meetings: measured, polite, unreadable. The client seems to have made their structure clear. He tapped his pen once against the desk. I have more experience managing scale. That may be true, I said evenly. But they're prioritizing technical leadership this time. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. It was a call from the CEO's office. He stood, murmured something about rescheduling, and walked out. When the announcement came the next morning, it was framed as a celebration of progress. A new division would be created focused on sustainable infrastructure innovation. I was named director. Sienna was appointed deputy. Our expanded regional project would be the flagship initiative. Mason was reassigned to head conventional systems integration. Still a director. Still with a title. But with no oversight over anything remotely cutting edge. Internally, everyone understood what that meant. Publicly, no one said it out loud. But the shift had happened. Not with a fight. Not with fanfare. Just results. That was the recognition. Not applause. Not a standing ovation. But control. Direction. Trust. The quiet transfer of real power into hands that had already proven they could carry it. 3 weeks after the announcement, the office floor plans were redrawn. Literally. Our desks were moved to the newly renovated east wing glass partitions, modular workstations, direct access to the research lab, and natural light that poured in like someone had remembered engineers were human. It was quiet at first. No ribbon cutting. No speeches. Just a slow migration of laptops and whiteboards, one team at a time. We called it the rebuild, half jokingly, because in many ways, that's what it was. A rebuild of space, of structure, of trust. Our new division had one goal: innovation without hierarchy. The nameplate outside my door read, Director, Sustainable Infrastructure Innovation. Cien nas rid Deputy Director. But we rarely used those titles when we spoke to the team. Because this wasn't about titles anymore. It was about creating the space we wished we'd had. Ideas were submitted anonymously in our internal system. Proposals were reviewed by a rotating team of peers. No one knew whose was whose until shortlists were formed. Credits were shared. Contributions logged. Debates encouraged. Mason was still with the company. Still had an office. Still ran the conventional systems division. But that office once central now felt like an annex to the real work. We didn't talk much those first few weeks. But I'd see him in the hall sometimes, watching through the glass wall as our team scribbled equations or laughed over sticky notes taped to the wall. He looked unsure. Not angry. Not defeated. Just unfamiliar with the version of the world unfolding in front of him. One morning, as I walked in early, I passed by the communal coffee bar. We'd installed something small, but symbolic. Engineers need caffeine, yes, but more than that, they need connection. There he was, stirring cream into his mug. No assistant. No suit jacket. Just Mason. We made brief eye contact. He gave a small nod. I returned it. Neither of us said anything. And in that quiet, I realized something. The restructure wasn't just physical. It was cultural. People asked better questions now. They felt safe failing because failing here meant learning, not punishment. Our youngest engineer, Amina, submitted a design tweak that cut power usage by 1–2% and got full credit for it in the final report. She'd been here only 4 months. In the old system, she might have never spoken up. Now, she was leading the next design sprint. That was the point. We didn't just rearrange reporting lines. We redefined what leadership looked like. It wasn't who had the loudest voice in meetings. It was who listened well enough to let the right ideas rise. Mason's name never came up in those early brainstorming sessions. Not out of spite. Just absence. His influence no longer reached here. Not because we had shut him out, but because he had built something so rigid, so brittle, that it couldn't bend to survive in this new space. We didn't destroy his system. We outgrew it. And in its place, we built something better quietly, steadily, one decision at a time. Not for revenge, but for resilience. Not to make a statement, but to make a future. The email arrived on a Thursday afternoon with a subject line so simple it almost disappeared in the inbox. Request for transfer, Mason Langley. I stared at it for a few seconds before opening it. Inside was a short formal message. Mason Langley has submitted a request to transfer to the Sustainable Infrastructure Innovation Division. He is interested in supporting implementation strategy and coordination efforts. No attachments. No explanation. Just that. I leaned back in my chair and let the moment sit. There had been signs. His office door had stayed open more often. He'd started attending a few of our cross-division presentations, not speaking, just listening. And once, during a hallway conversation, I caught him jotting down notes from something Sienna had said about modular filtration. But I hadn't expected this. That night, I told Sienna. She blinked once, set down her pen, and said, "You're kidding. Number? He wants to join us?" I nodded. After everything? Another pause. Then a small, slow smile. "And where exactly were you thinking of placing him?" I smiled back. "I thought the filtration optimization team could use a senior coordinator. Under your direct supervision." Her eyebrows shot up. "You want him to report to me? Only if you're comfortable with it." She looked away, processing it, then let out a dry laugh. "Oh, I'm more than comfortable. I just never imagined I'd get the pleasure of watching him learn what real collaboration looks like." A week later, the transfer was approved. On Mason's first day, he arrived early. No suit this time, just slacks, rolled-up sleeves, and a notebook. He didn't ask for a private office. He took a desk on the open floor, same as everyone else. When introduced to the team, he nodded politely and didn't bring up his old title. At first, old habits showed. He spoke too much in meetings, tried to redirect conversations back toward familiar frameworks. But it didn't work here, because in this division, experience didn't outweigh evidence. If your idea didn't hold up, someone younger would poke holes in it, respectfully and without hesitation. After a few quiet corrections, he began listening more, then asking questions, then sitting back to observe. 2 weeks in, he submitted his first contribution, a process tweak that helped one of the prototype units recalibrate faster during unexpected pressure spikes. It was smart, subtle, useful. He didn't announce it. He just dropped it into the team doc, and when the fix worked, he let others bring it up. Sienna acknowledged it in the next team huddle. She made no fuss, no performance. Just a line. That modification came from Mason. Let's make sure it's logged. He nodded. And for a second, I saw something new in his face. Not pride. Not strategy. But relief. Like he was finally allowed to be useful without needing to dominate. That's the thing about role reversals. Sometimes, they don't look like revenge. They look like redemption. But only if the person's willing to let go of who they were and start learning who they could be. Mason was learning. Not quickly, not perfectly, but visibly. And that mattered more than I expected. It was a Tuesday evening when I saw it. Most of the team had already left for the day. The office lights had dimmed to their energy-saving glow. Papers were stacked, whiteboards half erased, laptops tucked under arms on their way home. But in the far corner of the workspace, 2 figures were still talking, low voices, focused eyes, hands gesturing over a shared screen. Mason and Amina. She was our newest hire. 24. Bright, curious, a little shy around leadership. But she had a way of looking at system inefficiencies like they were puzzles to be solved instead of problems to be managed. They were debugging a simulation together. Mason wasn't directing, was leaning in, asking questions, following her lead. She pointed to a variable she thought was throwing off the pressure flow. He nodded. That actually makes sense. Let's test it. 10 minutes later, they ran the sequence. It worked. They both laughed. A quiet, mutual celebration. No ego. No performance. Just 2 engineers solving something together. As Mason packed up to leave, he glanced across the room and caught my eye. He hesitated for a second, then walked over. I wanted to say something, he began, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I understand now what you were trying to show me months ago. About merit, about listening. About letting people speak before you try to correct them. I didn't say anything. I wanted him to finish. I was wrong, he added. I'm sorry. And just like that, I believed him. Not because the words were perfect, but because they came from a man who once thought he was above learning and now, finally, wasn't. He nodded. Thank you. He turned to go, then paused. This division. It works. It actually works. I smiled. That was always the goal. He left. I stood there for a while, watching the city lights blink awake across the skyline, thinking about how far we'd come. Not just me. All of us. Sienna, who now ran team briefings like a conductor leading a symphony. Amina, who had just been invited to co-author our next white paper. Even Mason, who, for the first time, had something meaningful to contribute and no one to hide behind. This wasn't the ending I imagined when I first sat in that boardroom, flushed with embarrassment and rage. Back then, I thought victory would look like retribution, exposure, humiliation, payback. But that wasn't the real win. The real win was this. An ecosystem that protected ideas, not egos. A space where people spoke up not because they were invited but because they were expected to. A system that worked because it wasn't built on fear or titles or reputation. It was built on merit and trust and the belief that everyone deserves to be heard. And maybe that's what my father would have been most proud of. Not the project, not the metrics, but the quiet transformation that turned frustration into something better, something lasting. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to rebuild something broken, not with anger, but with purposes, share your story in the comments. And if you believe that true leadership is about lifting others, not standing above them, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories like this. Sometimes, the best revenge is changing the system so no one else has to fight the way you did.